timing, light, composition, seeing things. You can't take a photo of something you don't see. So those of us who take photos, we see differently. That difference is still there, even though the technology has made everything much easier.
Hello everyone, Tomasz here, and today I have another fascinating photography conversation for you. Just 2 days ago, I recorded this interview with Ian Charles Stewart, a Switzerland-based photographer originally from New Zealand. Ian is the author of the beautiful photography book called Indonesians, published back in 1983. He is also one of the co-founders of the famous Wired magazine. He is an expert on all things publishing, and photography has always been his passion. Today, Ian works predominantly as a portrait photographer, but he also shoots landscapes and travel images. He enjoys being on this constant search for means of expressing his visual fascinations. I hope very much you will enjoy listening to my conversation with Ian Charles Stewart.
Can you imagine your life without photography? No? Then you will love this show. And it doesn't matter if you're a DSLR, a mirrorless, or a mobile phone shooter. We're here to help your photography grow. This is Photography Radio.
Ian, welcome to the program. So nice to have you here. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation to the podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing really well. And Tomasz, thank you for inviting me. It's kind of you to do so and an honor to be here.
I had an idea. I want to kind of conduct this interview today in a slightly different way. I want to treat it like a carte blanche, like an empty page, because there is a few things I know about you, but there is many things I don't. So I will start with the things I know. I know you are one of the co-founders of the famous Wired magazine. I know you lived in China for a while. Today you are based in Switzerland, and I also know that today you work as a photographer for several foundations, model agencies, but also for private families. But what definitely drew my attention to your photographic work, in the first place, was your book, Indonesians, which I think it was released back in 83, right?
Yes, that's right.
Originally. And it's a book where you publish photographs of Java, Sumatra, Bali, and different Indonesian locations. You captured the culture that I think to a big extent does not exist anymore today on some truly beautiful photographs. So where should we start, Ian? When did everything, photography related, when did this journey start for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words about the book. It was something I did very early on, started when I was, I think, 2021. But let me start before that. A few years before that, the way it all happened was that my father was a journalist for the New York Times. He was a journalist of the old school. He didn't care about selling the newspaper. He cared about helping people understand what the world was like so that they could make up their own minds, so that their governments couldn't fool them, so that no one could convince them otherwise. He wanted to bring them what he saw as the truth. And I grew up in Hong Kong, therefore, where he was a foreign correspondent and president of the Foreign Correspondents Club in Hong Kong, with amazing people coming through the house. We had Henry Kissinger, we had great leaders, we had great photographers, and amongst them were people like Eddie Adams and Larry Burroughs. And one of the things that we were allowed to stay up, my brother and I, as long as we were quiet. We sat in our pajamas and our dressing gown, knees together, listening on the couch as this conversation flowed in the dining room and in the living room until we had to go to bed. And what came across from these quiet, thoughtful, wonderfully talented photographers were two lessons for me. One was that storytelling through pictures was magical. There was something magic about being able to tell stories through pictures. And I got excited, first of all, by the pictures, but also the way they described how they did it. And the second thing was that I never wanted to be a war photographer. Because it's a
good decision, I think, right?
Yeah, because they both worked in the Vietnam War, and it was a tough environment. And of course, we lost Larry in the last weeks of the war. He was in one of the last trips going down and in one of the last helicopters trying to get out of Saigon and sadly went down. So my first exposure to the idea of storytelling, and it really was storytelling more than pictures, with a dad who was a writer, an occasional photographer, and with the photographers that I met being all people who were trying to convey complex stories, like Larry's photo series of the tank sergeant that appeared in Life magazine. Those stories were what hit me, and that's what I wanted to do as a photographer. It wasn't single images per se. It was capturing a mood and an understanding a situation and then conveying that to people.
I can imagine it was the combination, right, of the influence exactly of your father being a journalist, so, somebody who was exactly telling stories, and then those photographers in the house, your father also using the camera himself. How old were you? When was it?
So those years were, I was 9, 10, 11. It was in the late 1960s. And the result was that I became, I had a Kodak Brownie, one of the original ones. I had very, very simple, basic mechanical cameras with simple film. The first real camera I had, my mother bought me a Yashica, I think it was the G, I can't remember which model, which was a rangefinder camera, very similar to, a little bit bulkier than the early Leicas. And I received that when I was 15 at boarding school in New Zealand. And I used that camera to take the first photo that I ever had published in a newspaper, where it was in Auckland. I guess it was, I can't remember which year it was now, I guess 1973 or 4. And this New Zealand competition was happening in Auckland. And being 15 and full of testosterone and wanting to see who the New Zealand contestants were, I went down to the building, which I couldn't get into because there were all sorts of people outside and there was lots of security. And then a photographer from a local newspaper, the Auckland Star, that I had known and met, and because I'd spent some time in the working in the darkroom of the local newspaper trying to learn how they did things. He saw me and he was getting out of a cab and carrying lots of gear. And so I rushed up to help him with his gear and then just followed him straight into because everybody assumed I was his assistant. And then I did a photo backstage with the girl who became the eventual winner on my little Yashica, rushed back to the Auckland Star offices where they knew me, where I'd been trying to learn from them. And I got my photo printed before the other photographers got back. And so my photo ended up in the paper. And that was the first work I ever got published. And for me, again, publishing the photo was the thing. Taking it was interesting, but it was seeing it in print and knowing that I'd conveyed something, that I'd shown something that other people couldn't see. That's what motivated me to take the photo in the first place. Okay,
nice. So you mentioned telling stories, right? Was there any particular, subject matter or genre back then that kind of was interesting you the most? Like, were you drawn to certain kinds of images or exactly subjects? What was the thing that was exciting you?
It's interesting that I know today many photographers choose genre when they decide it's something they want to do. And also because there are so many photographers today and photography is so easy relative to those periods when, film was complicated, camera was complicated, and everything was complicated. People need to choose genre to distinguish themselves and decide what they're going to focus on. I didn't have that sense at the time. Of course, I was mostly influenced and mostly interested in photojournalism, the storytelling aspect of conveying something that the average person couldn't see or didn't see. But I was also, I loved the fashion magazines that my mother received every month in Hong Kong. So the Vogues from different places around the world, US and Paris, and then Harper's and the various other magazines. So I loved the magic and the flamboyance of the fashion photography of the time. And again, the 1960s and 1970s fashion photography was much more about storytelling than it was about the clothes themselves. There was attitude in the pictures, and I loved that as much. So I was attracted by anything which had these elements of real emotion. Later on, when I was many years later, when I was photographing fashion in Paris in the 80s, I really wasn't a fashion photographer. I was really a beauty photographer where I focused on expressions and light. So I guess something in the early days of my exposure to the magazines of my mother attracted me to light and emotion more than clothes per se.
Does it also manifest itself still today? Because I was looking through your portfolio, and you shoot, portraits, models, individual images very often. I think today, right? It's a series of shots, but you present also, individual shots.
It's true. I guess more than anything else, even if you look at my book on Indonesia, I shoot portraits. I try to shoot an individual and show something about them which is natural. I tend not to pose. The Indonesian book is people in markets, people on the street, people in their wooden houses on riverbanks. I tend to shoot what I see quietly and surreptitiously, trying not to offend. And I guess I still do that today. The work that you're seeing on the Instagram site and other things today is me trying to work out what I want to do. But even I can see there are two things which seem to be consistent in the photos. And I'm shooting everything from stuff I see while I'm walking with my iPhone to portrait sessions which are paid for by individuals for their agencies.
Mm-hmm.
They're still all about two things. One is light. Although I trained for a year and a half, almost 2 years with a studio photographer in Sydney many years ago, a food photographer, where trying to light ice cream and watching it melt after 20 seconds and having to replace it with another bit of ice cream and working out the impact of different types of lights on whipped cream on a cake for a cover of a magazine. These things teach you a lot about how light works and doesn't work. And so I guess I've always had a sensitivity to light, which I still enjoy. But I tend to shoot mostly natural light now. I like playing with the light that exists. So light is terribly important. You'll see that in my landscapes and in the people. But the second thing is, I guess, being a father of two girls, I like quiet confidence. So I'm trying to show a person at a quiet space where they're contemplative. I try not to have people invent expressions. I try not to have people fake something. I'm trying to see what they're like. So I guess those are two things I like. I do like landscapes to a degree, although I don't have the patience to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning, climb to the top of a mountain and do an amazing sunrise over a mountain range, as people do, and I admire it tremendously, but I'm not going to do that.
So I'm getting the sense, like from your story, your own story, which you're already, partially telling here, that you have lived in several different locations around the globe, right? Asia, Hong Kong, China, Australia, New Zealand. Now you're in Switzerland. So I can imagine you have been dealing with, or discovering very different cultures, very different behaviors, and probably very different reactions to a camera in all of those places, right? Do you see like a common denominator when it comes to people in front of your camera? Like, does the same approach, your approach, work with all those different people from all those different locations?
Yes. There's a couple of things. One is that I think it helps to smile. When I was younger and enthusiastic, everything was magical to me. Every new country I worked in was wonderful. Every new person I met was amazing. And so it was super easy to just smile. I generally smiled after the photo, right? Because I didn't want to affect them before I took the photo. So I would see someone, wait for them to see me, because I like to take the photo just when they see me, before they've worked out that there's a camera in their face, before they work out that I'm someone different. The cover of my Indonesians book, the woman there, the old woman with the long ears who's knitting a fishing net, she was the first person I saw in that village deep in Borneo, in the Indonesian side of Borneo, which is called Kalimantan. And I never saw her again, because I saw her on the balcony. I snuck up with I think I had an old Nikon F2 and I had the 182.8 at the time. I went to the side of the longhouse where she was, because there's no way I was going to be able to get any closer. And I waited until she saw me. So that look on the book is her just looking up from her knitting to turn to me and look. And then I took the picture, and that was the only picture I got. I got one photo. Mm-hmm. And then I smiled in a gentle way, as I tended to at the time, but she still ran off and I never saw her again for the whole 2 weeks I was in the village. So I smile afterwards, not before. I think projecting humility and being gentle and smiling helps. Then I was young too, which makes it easier. That attitude, I think, works generally everywhere. Also, if people get upset, I immediately show them the picture so they can see what I'm doing, and I explain what I'm doing. And if they get upset and they're really upset, then of course I'll delete the photo. I don't mind doing that. So I think a little bit of humility, a little bit of gentleness, and a smile, I have seen work everywhere. Now, sensitivities vary. The awareness of photography, the flood of images we see today, and the concerns about privacy make people more nervous. So, for example, it's very hard to photograph children in a public space now. Mm. You're going to raise sensitivities no matter what happens. So, sadly, because children are a wonderful subject, as a father of two girls, I love I love the expressions and playfulness of children. You can't do that in public without permission. It's just certainly in the West. In the East, it's still possible. I know that there are some great photographers still photographing children in India and Africa and other places. But if you try to photograph children in the street in the West now, sensitivity is so high, you can't do it. So I actually often shoot kids for agencies, partly because serious models in Switzerland, where we now live, all move abroad if they have any chance of work. So the adults who are left are not necessarily those who are going to get international work, but the kids still are. So you still have kids who are quite young. So those are all organized with the agency and the parents and a stylist and what have you. So they're all shot for a purpose. But it's very hard to shoot street photography now. You get into trouble. But I think the attitude is the same. The attitude is the same everywhere that I have when I take street.
Now, back in the 80s, you were shooting with film cameras, right?
Yeah.
So there was no showing the picture, erasing the picture kind of option.
In those days, I didn't have that option. In those days, I simply smiled and explained what I was doing. And again, I was younger and enthusiastic, and I almost never had a problem. But those were more innocent days too. We didn't have the internet. There wasn't the same access to imagery and video. There wasn't the same understanding of the world.
Right.
The world is a much more transparent place today, and people are much more suspicious, which is a bit sad. In those days, it was simpler. And again, working in developing countries, they're more curious to know who you are and what you're doing. And they don't have this notion of a published book, or they did not have this notion of a published book in those days. And so I would explain what I was doing. I'm not absolutely sure they understood. It was more my manner which made them relax. If you're able to be kind and helpful and humble. And also, everywhere I went to photograph in the different countries I was in, I always tried to learn the local language. I succeeded to differing degrees in different countries, but I always had some of the language. And of course, they'll laugh at that because you speak badly. It's a lovely way. It's a lovely way to engage with people. And I tried to engage.
When you went to Indonesia, then working on the book, was it your only visit there, or you've revisited Indonesia later on?
The Indonesian book took 3 years.
Okay, so it was several visits.
I was living there, and in fact,
you were living there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I had to move there to do the book. I was traveling into different regions. I was the only person. The previous book that had been done was only Java, Bali, and Sumatra, and I wanted to visit all 27 provinces. I should give you some background. My mother was Chinese, born in Indonesia, and I wanted to do the book to show people the country where she lived. Again, it was a story, right? I wanted to tell the story.
Mm-hmm.
People always asked where my mother came from, and they weren't sure what my nationality was because I was a mixed race kid, and I wanted to tell that story. But for me, that meant going to all 27 provinces, and that just took forever. And it was quite an effort. There was I was robbed in Bali, of all places, where the tourists are, of course. I caught cholera, typhoid, dysentery. It was really quite a struggle over 3 years, but I eventually got to all 27 provinces. Actually, that's not quite true. I got to 26 provinces, and I got some photos from someone else for the 27th province.
Yeah. Wow. So respect. I mean, I can imagine not only the process of actually traveling and photographing, but later on, the next steps, like, developing all the films, choosing the images, looking at the negatives. It's an enormous effort, I think, in comparison how easy in a way it is today, right? With digital files.
It's absolutely true. I had a pro lab in Germany. I would take the photos. I'd be gone for 3 to 6 weeks. I would come back. I made sure that the film went into refrigerators if I could find them, or in ice boxes, or actually in plastic bags underwater in rivers to try and keep them cool during the trips. And when I finally got back, they were sent off by courier to a lab I was using in Germany. And then maybe 2 weeks after that, I received the images. So it was often 2 months after I'd taken the photos that I saw whether I got an image or not. It really was a very different process. And then, of course, you have transparencies, and you're trying to choose. And the ability to modify the pictures was much, much lower then. Not one single image in my entire book is retouched. It's all pretty much full frame, unretouched images, which means you had to do it all in the camera. Life is much easier now with post-processing.
Well, it depends a little bit how you look at it, because sometimes I'm kind of jealous of those times where you had to learn the craft, you have to really know what you were doing, but exactly like you say, you had it in the camera, it was done. Okay, you could judge, the composition and if the image worked or not, but otherwise, once you had it, I think the feeling was just great of having the image just immediately on the spot.
Once it came back and you saw it, yes, sending it off, you were still nervous. But once it came back and you saw it, yes.
Let's take a quick break. I hope you are enjoying today's interview. If you want to find out more about my today's guest, have a look at the podcast show notes. You will find them in your podcast application. I hope very much you are already subscribed to Photography Radio. If not, make sure you do it now and don't miss any of our future episodes. Interviews, inspiration, latest news and trends, all things photography in one podcast feed. Thanks so much for listening, and now let's get back to today's interview. Now, Ian, you said so you did travel, some documentary photography, portraits, people, and just a few minutes ago you said you are today kind of searching again for who you are or where you are as a photographer. Could you a bit elaborate on that? Because it's interesting. I have those moments myself every couple of years, or sometimes even more often.
Yeah.
And what does it mean for you? Because you enjoyed the process, you enjoyed those travels, you enjoyed those. I imagine you enjoyed it a lot. And today you are still searching for something. Are you searching for something new?
So it's because I went away. I was a photographer for almost 12 years. And from the time of that first sale to the newspaper in Auckland to the last photos I did for fashion magazines in Paris and for the Aga Khan, who I worked for, and some other private clients, People magazine principally, doing celebrities in Paris in 85 and 6 and 7. And then I went away. I realized, partly doing the commercial work, and living in Paris and meeting people who were graduating from INSEAD, the business school there, I realized that I'd been using half of my brain, logistics and organization and business side for the book were there, but mostly I've been using half of my brain for a decade. And I was starting to realize I was missing using the sort of more logical, more thinking, more analytical side of my brain. And also the work available, even then in the mid-'80s, was starting to change. There were an awful lot of photographers around. There were agencies around. The competition was quite high. And it became very much a question of social relationships and there were other things that decided what work you got. And the work I liked, the fashion and beauty stuff that I was doing for the magazines, paid dreadfully. I get paid, I remember, the equivalent of $90 US at the time, which for 4 pictures in the back of Vogue, which would cost me $150 to shoot. But you did it because of the name and that appeared in the just close to the binding vertically on the page, your credit, because that helped you get advertising work. And then some of the corporate work I would do, I was getting paid $5,000 a day at the time, but it wasn't the most fascinating work. It's a gentleman who runs a company in his boardroom with some other people, and I was the work that was paying the bills wasn't the work I enjoyed doing, and for that reason I started to drift from photography. And so I left and I went to business school, and I ended up building media organizations, things I understood because I had a background in media. And I worked for Pearson for a while, the owners of the FT and Penguin and Addison Wesley and Longman and various other things. So I learned about the business of media from after business school. Then, of course, we launched Wired magazine and had a ton of fun with that. But I didn't take a single picture of a Wired. Once I left photography, I really left it, and I focused on the business of media for the next 20 years. And I've done a number of things since then, and luckily I've been successful. So coming back from China, which was a non-work thing, I was setting up social ventures there, social entrepreneurship projects, trying to help people help themselves rather than focusing on charity. Coming back from China, because China's changed and our kids had grown up and left, my wife and I decided we'd go back to doing things that we love. We'd essentially been retired for a period of time, semi-retired. We were always busy, but we had the freedom to do what we wished. Now we decided we needed to justify our existence. So my wife quickly got headhunted for something in education. And then I started getting, I got a request from a friend to shoot a theater production in Lugano. He's someone who's known me for 45 years and known me since I was a photographer. And he said, Ian, I got a photographer for a charity event, for a charity play, a theater production. We need really good photos of the production so we can put them on the posters. Could you possibly do it for me? And so I flew down to Lugano and did the photos. And that was in 2014. And I discovered that I enjoyed it. And that was really the first time I'd worked for a commercial client in 30 years. Mm-hmm. So that's what started it. And so then, so that led to someone in the play wanting a portfolio. So I did photos for him. And then it snowballed. It didn't snowball. Things have happened since then. I meet someone sees the work, they want me to do it. So I've done a bit of theater, a bit of agency work, a bit of portfolio work. I shoot while I'm walking around. But I'm also a media business guy, right? So I understand the world of media. I understand both traditional publishing and the new media world, having been at the dawn of it all with Wired. And so I see that actually the approach to photography, the acceptance of photography, the respect for photography has changed. Everybody thinks they're a photographer. The technology is much simpler than it was. Post-production allows you to modify things. So sometimes what you publish is better or more interesting than what you saw, which I'm still coming to terms with. I'm not sure I'm happy with that for me. I love what some people do, but I'm not sure I want to do that. Mm-hmm. So I am re-entering a world. It hasn't been a continuum. I'm re-entering a world which I loved at the time, but which is very, very different now. And I'm not sure, I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure I have a place. Of course, I have an eye. And of course, I have an ability to work with people, to take portraits, either people I don't know or people I do know. I'm able to work with individuals and try and create images that they like. I just am not sure what I like anymore and what I want to do.
Okay, so you are not sure exactly, because I was about to ask, like you mentioned so often now exactly working with people, portraiture and so on. Is it not this which you enjoy doing the most, exactly, photographing people?
I think,
or you're not sure.
It's not that I do enjoy the process. I like photographing people. Jimmy Nelson's book, if you think about my book, Tomash, and then you look at Jimmy Nelson's book, you'll see similarities in approach and styling. And if Jimmy's book hadn't come out, that would be a great idea. Disappearing tribes, groups of people who are on the fringes of society that you don't normally see, that whose cultures and ways of living are being lost. I would have loved to have done that sort of book. No, the issue isn't that I do like the genre of photographing people, whether it's organized or whether it's someone I don't know and I find them in the street. It's why am I shooting them? Everything I did in my 20s was published in a book, in a magazine, in a newspaper. Now, why would you do it? There are loads of magazines, but they're dying. Newspapers take work from anybody who gets them. The number of people generating images is extremely high. Why add to that flow? Why should I? There are lots of good photographers. I mean, of course, there are more bad photographers than good photographers, but honestly, there are lots of very good photographers around.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. What do you think the ratio is? Because exactly, you were, you went through the years. You were in the age of analog photography. Today, you see, like you said, everyone is a photographer. So the amount of people actually photographing is way, way higher, probably, right? It's like without comparison. You're also observing exactly this market, this space. What do you think the ratio of quote unquote good photographers actually is when you take all of those people taking pictures today and back then? Do you think the ratio, kind of the percentage of what you would consider good photographers is kind of the same, or it also changed?
Tomash, that's a clever question. It's a good question. Not enough people ask it, I think. So it's true for many things where a production process or a creation process becomes easier. The number of people in the industry, the number of people able to do it rises. And so the mass is certainly much bigger. I actually don't think that the percentage of really good photographers has changed. Mm-hmm. I think it's still a very small percentage of the population that are really very good. The mass is, everything below the pyramid. If you create the pyramid of very best to less best, the pyramid is fattened out a great deal. I was watching a YouTube video the other day where someone had done an analysis of the professional photographers working in a bunch of different sectors. And interestingly, the number of professionals in a range of different sectors has decreased in the United States because people do it themselves. So that's an example of saying there's an awful lot of people have learned photography. Maybe they're not great photographers, but it's good enough for them to take the photo of their hairdressing subject or of their house that's for sale or of the portrait they wish to put in for their own marketing. They do it themselves or get a friend to do it. So you have more photographers around capable of doing adequate work, and the number of professionals is shrinking. But if you look at the very top of the professional market, so not professionals in general, but the very best, I don't think that proportion has changed over the last 30 years.
I think so. I think it's probably about the importance of any given, project or the importance of photography in this given project or undertaking or whatever it might be. Like you say, almost everyone is able to take an adequate photograph for most of the needs. But I think still those places, those moments where the photography really matters, like without comparison, much more. This is exactly this 1% of people who can actually deliver the best possible job.
Yeah, it's the small bits that, timing, light, composition, seeing things. You can't take a photo of something you don't see. So those of us who take photos, we see differently. And I think that difference is still there, even though the technology has made everything much easier.
Now, this is a pretty fascinating, this conversation, but let's talk for a couple of minutes just about. You mentioned you also use your iPhone, right? For example, for your photography occasionally, or more often than your camera.
Because it's the camera I always have on me, and because I see things as I walk, as I go through cities. Yes. Okay,
and then what's your quote unquote traditional camera of choice these days?
So I use. I used to have my analog cameras were a Leica M3, M4, and a series of lenses, Nikon F2s, F3s, and Hasselblad 500CM and SWCM. That's what I had analog in the past. Today, I use mostly digital Nikons. I rent, because at $55,000 a pop, it's kind of expensive and I can't justify it. I rent phase ones. I've also used Fuji GFXs. I like medium format, not just because the quality of the final image, the resolution of the final image is so high, but actually it slows you down. In funny ways, contemporary medium format is a little bit like using old manual 35 millimeter analog cameras, and I quite like the process with it. I'm waiting to see what happens with the Leica S3. I really like the interaction, the usability of the Fujifilm GFX series. I'm less mad about them aesthetically, and I'm sorry, I'm someone where the aesthetic stuff counts. The new X1D from Hasselblad is of course very pretty, but I wish there was a combination of the GFX with the Hasselblad design. That'd be a nice camera. And then I'm also looking at Leicas. I've been playing with the SL2 and the Q2 lately, and I'm about to go off to the Leica Summit in Bern, and I think I'm probably going to buy the Leicas. At my age and at my time in life, I'm the aesthetics of the gear. People say it's not supposed to matter. The aesthetics of the gear matters to me. I admire technology that does its job extremely well, that also happens to be aesthetically pleasing. I call them functional art.
Yeah, this is the excellent combination, right? But still, you are grabbing your iPhone to capture something. Why are you doing it?
I like the result. I want to show people what I saw. That last phrase, show people what I saw, is what I did with the book too, with the books.
Exactly.
I see things that people don't see, so I want to show it to them. This morning, or yesterday morning on my Instagram, I stuck a photo up. I was just walking. I have to walk. I have a back issue, and so I walk every day. I do 8 to 10 kilometers every day, whether it's snowing or sunshine. And I was walking in dusk, and I looked right, and there was this clump of trees and a car parked in front of it, and the light was just a particular shade. It was almost like there was a bit of smog in the sky with a little bit of fog. And so I took the photo, and I put that photo up this morning. It happened to be the camera I have with me. So I see things that I want to show people. That's what I do. It's lazy photography. I'm not setting it up. I just happened to see it. I pulled out my phone, took the photo, and so that's up on Instagram today.
Yeah, and now putting a photograph on Instagram, isn't it in a way, a kind of publishing?
It is. Not very many people see my photos because I don't publish every day, and therefore I'm not satisfying the criteria of the Instagram system, which they have an algorithm which decides who gets to see what photos. So very few people get to see what I'm shooting on Instagram. But still, yes, it's nice. And it also, you can't help it. Every individual likes seeing lots of likes. It's a cycle. I have a love-hate relationship, as I think many photographers do with Instagram, because Instagram encourages IP theft. The most popular sites on Instagram are sites of influencers, not photographers. They're people who don't actually take the photos. They simply use photos that they like, and they attract viewers and therefore sometimes revenue because of that. I don't think that's fair. Some of these people don't even credit photographers, but at least the ones who credit can sometimes help photographers get known. But I'm sort of unsure about some of the new models. And again, I'm someone who understands how these things work. But do I really want to be doing stuff that other people would then take advantage of more than me on Instagram? Sometimes I'm not sure. It's one of the reasons, by the way, I did actually put up more professional work for a while, but I now basically only put up my iPhone photos and then a few samples from different shoots that I do from time to time. But
I'm looking at your feed right now. I can see also some absolutely excellent portraits, also of kids, of models, and so this is your professional work.
Yeah, that's the stuff I get paid for. Everything you see, which is a landscape or family photo, is obviously just done with my iPhone. And the stuff that's I end up doing a lot of kids stuff. There aren't many people who care about photographing kids. Again, being a dad helps. And these are mostly kids who want to be either dancers or actresses or actors, and they're all getting paid, so they can afford to pay me for the work. Interesting on the question of payment. I don't necessarily need payment, but it changes the relationship with your subject. They appreciate it more. I spent 15 years doing stuff for free for people after I sold everything. And it's bad for the soul. When you're not being paid and no one's valuing it, first of all, they take you for granted. And secondly, you start wondering whether you have any value. So I've decided that now if I'm going to do professional work, it'll be paid for. And if people don't want to pay, then I won't do it, even though I could.
Mm-hmm. Ian, I'm giving you right now one more like on your Instagram. And yeah, well, I wish you all the best. I wish you, I wish you that you find this path for the next, couple of years, for the next chapter maybe of your photography. I think you have an amazing eye, whatever you do, and I think we all kind of struggle with the same, questions and doubts. So it's nothing special, right? In your case, and you will for sure go in a direction, that your heart will push you in.
I think it's a combination of both, Tomasz. We both have two things that tend to drive us. We have heart and we have head. The head is the logic. Does it make sense? Does it pay bills? Is it possible to develop a career doing this? That's the head side. The heart side is the stuff that makes you pull out the camera when you're not even sure why you're doing it. And I think to find a good direction in life, you need to listen to both. When you can get your heart and your head working in the same direction, then I think you found something. And I guess that's what I'm looking for. At the moment, my head's saying this doesn't make sense, and my heart keeps making me take out a camera. I need to find something where both are happy.
Yeah, so I wish you those two come in sync as soon as possible, right? Was great talking to you. But do you have any, existing right now, ideas, projects photographically that you are kind of about to, embark on?
Yes, I do. I have projects that I'm thinking about. I tend to think in terms of book-style projects where you have a story to tell, a range of images to show, projects to produce. So I have ideas, and I just have to try and decide whether it's worth doing it, whether it hasn't been done better by other people, and whether I think enough people will be interested. Because I'm not going to do it if I don't think anybody will look at it.
Go for it, yeah. That's the only thing I can say.
Thank you, Tomasz.
Thank you. Thanks so much for great conversation. We'll be releasing it very soon on the podcast. Enjoy your time, enjoy your travels. Keep your cameras with you all the time. I don't know what's the number one camera. You have your iPhone anyway, right, in your pocket. So
the iPhone I have all the time, and at the moment I'm just trying to decide if I buy the Q2 and have that with me all the time. I used to have an FM2 which I carried everywhere. When I was living in Paris, even if I went down the road to buy a croissant, my FM2 would be around my neck. I think the Q2 is the closest I've seen to that. And I will probably buy one of those to have as my sort of grab as you walk out the door camera.
I played with the Q2, it was 2 years ago, I think. It's already on the market, right? And
Q2 came out this year, yeah.
Beautiful camera, that's for sure, yeah. Perfect, travel companion and always in your pocket kind of thing. Very
sensible little Leica. Yeah, no, it's a high quality. And the new one has the new 47 megapixel sensor in it. And I believe IBIS. So it's a really solid little piece of technology.
Thanks so much, Ian. Have a great day, and talk to you again soon. Thanks so much.
It was my pleasure, Tomasz. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. Hit subscribe on your podcast app. It would mean a lot for us to have you as our regular listener. Head over to photographyradio.com to drop your suggestion for future editions of Photography Radio or simply to say hello. We would absolutely love to hear from you. In the meantime, have a wonderful night and we will be back with more photography in your ears very soon.